Hello and welcome to the big picture. The trade unions in India have gone through a very lean phase in the last decade or more. But tomorrow, on February 28th, an unprecedented strike has been called in the sense that all the major trade unions belonging to different political ideologies have come together for the first time in independent India and have declared a strike across the country. They have come out with a list of demands, which obviously looks at how the labor situation in this country can improve. But underlying message of this strike is that the neoliberal policies which have been followed in this country for the last 2 decades or so, they say has done a lot of damage to the labor in this country. So we are looking at this strike tomorrow and also asking the question what it means and whether there is also some sort of a revival of the trade unionism in this country. To discuss this, I have with me Mr. Tapan, General Secretary of the CITU, Center for Indian Trade Unions, a CPIM affiliated body. Also, Mr. Baij, General Secretary of the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, affiliate of the BJP, which has connections with the BJP politically or ideologically at least, and Mr. Jesim Pais. Mr. Pais is an assistant professor in the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development and has been studying the labor situation in this country for some years now. And also on the OB will be the veteran journalist, Mr. Prem Shankar. Mr. Jha, a veteran economics editor, he has been the editor of many leading business publications as well as leading newspapers of the country. He has been a close witness to the policies which have been followed in this country for the last four decades or more. So welcome to all of you. Let me first go to Mr. Tapan Sen. Mr. Sen, this is an unprecedented thing, having unions with ideological affinity to Congress, BJP, left parties, and several others all coming together. This is the first time this happening. How and why has this happened?
You see, at the outset, let me tell you that identifying trade unions with the political parties is not correct. There may be different ideals, different understanding, different perceptions of the development. Based on that, there may be difference in the trade union, and that's why there are so many trade unions.
That's right.
But don't identify.
You are a CPIM MP in any case.
But that thing apart, yes, it is a situation in the country which is bringing workers and the trade unions revolving around the workers on the same platform, because a gradual commonality of realization is developing that the policies those are being followed in the economic policy regime, it is not in the interest either of the worker or of the country. It is only in the interest of the handful of a section of the society and going against majority of the society. So in this premise, gradually a commonality of realization is coming up, and that commonality of realization has brought trade unions with different economic, political, ideological perceptions on the same platform on a common issues to fight out.
Right. Mr. Rai, it's not usual that a leftist trade union and the BMS, which has ideological affiliation to the BJP and Parivar, coming together. How has this happened? You don't feel any more uncomfortable sitting along with the left parties and taking up the issues together?
First, I beg to contradict that BMS is not at all affiliated with the BJP. It is an independent organization, not a single worker of BMS is either MLA, MP, or even corporator.
Unlike in other trade unions.
Unlike other trade unions. But the issue is, why the trade union? The main task of the trade union to serve for the workers and for the nation. And now workers are in trouble. This is the only issue which has forced everyone to come together. So I don't feel uncomfortable, but rather I feel pleasure. When we met together on 24th November after our rally on 23rd, we were very much pleased to know that our thinking for the cause of workers are more or less identical. So that program, and I must congratulate the government who forced us
Well,
to come together.
okay. Okay, let me go to Mr. Jha. Mr. Jha, you heard the two leading trade union activists. You know, isn't it very rare that you find this kind of unity among the trade unions? And what do you think this will lead to? Mr. Jha, can you hear me?
Yes, I didn't know you were speaking to me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Jha, I'm asking you.
I think, yes, well, the camera light was off here, so I didn't know what was going on. No, I think that the issue that you have raised of unions working together, why are they working together, is not the important one.
Yes.
The important one is what are the problems that have brought them together.
Yes.
And I think that the unions have taken an extraordinarily responsible step in the framing of the issues that they wish to fight on together.
Right.
The first is that the plight of the unorganized workers in the country. The unorganized sector is now the only sector in which there is any kind of employment generation.
Right.
And it is being done, these people have no protection whatever for anything, whether it's health or whether it is old age pensions or whether it is accidents. And the social security for the unorganized sector is long overdue. And what the government has been actually trying to do is so small and so pointless, really. I mean, that it made no impact whatever.
Yes.
The issues become very serious because actually in the last 2 years, you've had a very sharp drop in employment in the unorganized sector.
Right.
And because we don't bother to collect data on the unorganized sector, our government chooses not to know what's happening there. But who looks after these people? I'm very glad that the trade unions have taken this issue up. The second issue is that of contract workers.
Right.
And please note the responsibility of what the trade unions have said, because what they've said is contract workers who are being kept on permanent employment but as contract workers. Well, that I'm afraid is a contradiction in terms. You can have seasonal workers who are contract workers. I'm
Right.
entirely in favor of that. In fact, several years ago, it was the opposite. Seasonal workers had to be kept as permanent employees,
Right.
and therefore nobody could for example, no garment exporter could even hope to compete in the world market. Today we are having the opposite.
Right.
So I think it is terribly important to distinguish between the two, and the trade unions have asked to do that. My only question is whether you can put an arbitrary figure of 10,000 rupees as the minimum salary. I think that this should be left to bargaining and to the conditions of different industries. But I'm very glad that the trade unions have taken a very responsible step and filled a lacuna in policy making, which actually should have been done by the government long ago.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Jha, please stay on. We'll come back to you. Mr. Pais, you have been studying the labor movements in this country. You see this, what is happening now as some sort of a revival of the trade unionism at all in this country? Because we have seen the decline in the last couple of decades.
My understanding is as follows. The trade unions traditionally represented the organized sector.
Right.
And in the last 2 years, there is some kind of a shrinking of the organized sector.
Exactly.
Driven by policy.
Right.
So if you go that way, then you say the activity of trade unions are reducing.
Are reducing.
Because the organized sector reduces. Along with that, there is a recognition in the trade union movement and otherwise that the trade unions have to now go forward beyond the organized sector to the unorganized sector.
Right.
And this has happened in the past more vigorously now in the last few years. So if we bring the unorganized sector and the trade unions together, then meaning it's not really a revival, but it's the arrival of trade unionism in the unorganized sector. So that's what you're seeing.
So okay, we will discuss this further. We will need to go into a short break now. We'll come back and look at the issues which have been raised and the demands which have been raised by the trade unions who are going to go on strike from tomorrow. Thank you. Please keep watching. We'll come back very soon. Welcome back. We are discussing the proposed joint strike called by all the trade unions in this country on Tuesday. So let me come to Tapan Singh. Both Mr. Jha and Mr. Pais, pointed out how important it is to look into the issues of the unorganized sector. All these years, the trade unions have not really looked at the unorganized sector as such. Now, the fact that you all have started looking towards is it, as Mr. Pais was pointing out, because there's a decline in the organized sector itself that you're looking at the other thing?
I think you have misread the development in the trade union movement, and it is unfortunate. Those who are studying trade union movement have not read it in proper context. If you see from the trade unions membership since 80s, mid-80s, it is not 2 or 4 years. Since mid-80s, if you see, the more than 50% of the trade union membership officially recorded by the government and verified by the government is from the unorganized sector. So it is not a 2-year or 4-year business that we have started looking into the aspect of our unorganized sector. It is in the process of neoliberalism, the organized sector is shrinking.
Yes.
And our informal sector is increasing. And naturally in that process, the proportion of the membership from the unorganized sector in every trade union, it's not mine, is increasing. And we, from the day one, we are along. And you must be noting some of the unorganized sector movement is more than 5 decades old. Rather, it was from the pre-independence days, like the unorganized sector movements in the BD sector, like the unorganized sector movement in the private transport sector. These are not our organized sector. These were historically unorganized sector. The cashew workers movement, the toddy tappers workers movement, some of them are as old as our independence. And there the trade union movement was traditionally had their existence. But what is important, what is new to be noted by all concerned who are studying the trade union history, let me kindly suggest that the new areas which are becoming informal, where the formal sector is being pushed to informality, and informality is being used as an instrument of pursuing profit. Informality means you need not pay full wage, you need not pay minimum wage. Informality means you need not bother about the labor laws, bother about the social security. So informality is being consciously being utilized as an instrument by the smart entrepreneurs, and they are getting award of the entrepreneurs of the year award no less than a person from Prime Minister or Finance Minister. That has become the culture against which the trade unions are coming together and fighting back, that we cannot allow this degenerating culture to work in the workplaces.
Okay, let me come to Mr. Rai. Mr. Rai, in the last 3-4 months that you people have got together, have been talking together and then planning this strike for tomorrow, you must have had interactions with the government also, with some of the points which are demands which have been raised. What kind of reactions, what kind of response have you been getting from the government?
You see, we have been discussing with the government since long too, I think more than 10 years.
Yes.
The outcome of the discussion was, you will notice that in 2008, an act was enacted by the government of India in the name of Unorganized Workers Social Security Act. This was the achievement of discussion. We were hoping that this act, if applicable, in true sense and spirit, then will solve the problems the unorganized workers, 42 crores in the India. But what happened? They did not constitute even the welfare board as per the act in all the states are at the center. They constitute by the name, but nothing, no, not a single meeting happened till today. They provided 1,000 crore rupees as a budget allocation, whereas in all over world, more than 30% is being allocated of the annual budget for the social security of the worker.
Right.
In India, it is less than 1%. That 1,000 crore means 25 rupees per head. How can it solve? So we have been discussing, we have been forcing, but the net out result is this, that the inclination of the government goes towards the employer
And not towards
not to the workers.
Okay, Mr. Jha. Mr. Jha, I mean, see, the trade unions have a point. They have been pursuing these matters for several years, but the government seems to have turned a deaf ears to them. You know, is this part of the as they call the neoliberal policies, and is this the way the governments react normally in these kind of situations?
Mr. Nikam, may I just comment on what my predecessors have said,
Yes.
rather than directly try to answer your question
Right.
here. The question we need to ask ourselves is, why have these malpractices, and I call them malpractices, of completely freezing out the organized sector and having only unorganized sector workers, getting permanent workers on contract basis, why have they come up? They've come up because in the past, the purpose of unionism, trade unionism, was to protect jobs at any cost.
Right.
It was not to protect the conditions of, protect workers in situations where they lost their jobs, but to protect jobs at any cost. And in time, I mean, I'm talking about great economists like Ashok Rudra and Pranab Bardhan, who said this as far back as in the early 70s. You created an aristocracy of a workforce, which is your rump organized sector labor force today.
Right.
And these people had total security, and there was absolutely no flexibility for the employer
Right.
in order to be able to adjust his working to different market conditions. And it is to bring back that flexibility that they began to use all these stratagems. Today, the best thing that I can see from what I've read of the demands of the trade unions today is that they have acknowledged this, and they want the unorganized sector to be protected in terms of their, so that they don't get hurt by losing their jobs.
Right.
But I just hope that this will not turn into something that once again tries to protect jobs at any cost. Because when you protect a job when there is no need for it, you are, when the market no longer wants their job, then you're actually preventing new people from getting jobs.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's an interesting thing. How do you react to what Mr. Jha is saying?
Yes.
You know, you please react to what he is saying.
Actually, it's not a job protection, and I don't think it is a flexibility that is really a problem for the Indian entrepreneurs. If you see the employment profile in the organized sector, everywhere the organized sector, the employment in totality increased. It is nowhere the employment has decreased. But in totality, employment increased by way of...
You're talking about the organized sector?
Organized sector. He is mainly
Right.
talking about the problem of the organized sector,
Right.
the job protection at any cost, that don't give employers any flexibility, so go for contract work. It is, you just see the thing that overall, over the period, pick up any organized sector industry, in industry as a whole, not a particular establishment, and if you see, employment has not rather increased, but increased the proportion of the regular workers who are converted into the
Contract workers.
as contract workers, regular workers, because as when they are contract workers, you need not write their name in the register, you need not pay them PF and ESI, and you can make them work with 1/3 the wage a regular worker was getting, but they are producing the same value, same wealth.
Right.
So it is just the rate of extraction to be increased. It is just utilizing the contract system as an instrument of that. If it is really the matter of adjustment of the manpower because of the ups and downs of the market, if you go through overall aggregation of the workforce in a particular sector, over a period it is increased, but the number of low quality work job increased phenomenally, and the regular work has gone down in a also and gone down phenomenally. So one replacing the other. So really the matter of job protection and the lack of flexibility is just being utilized as a plea to do away with even the existing labor laws, to do away with whatever protection is there for the labor
Okay.
through the labor laws, and although those labor laws are not being implemented. So it is being played which does not exist at all.
Pais, do you agree with Mr. Tapan saying that this what has happened in the organized sector, jobs have actually gone up, though it for outside purposes it looks as if jobs have come down because they have all been shifted to the contractor.
Actually, what Mr. Sen is trying to say is that the employment in the organized sector, in the sector itself, has not gone down. Because all
Do you agree with that?
Yes. All new employment happens, but it happens on contract.
Right.
So the National Commission for Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector, the Professor Arjun Sengupta Commission, has this term informal employment.
Right.
So you say organized sector and informal employment. The informal employment in organized sector has tremendously increased. All new employment in organized sector is informal, where, as he said, you don't have to abide by certain provisions of labor laws.
So, Mr. Rai, you were supposed to, you wanted to say something on this.
I want to say that for any service, there are 3 conditions required. Yes, talk about job security. Job security, wage security and social security. These are the 3 basic requirements as a human,
Yes.
not as a worker. And these 3 things are the target of the trade union movement. We want to establish it.
Right.
What is happening? That is not only job security, but they have snatched job security, they have snatched social security, they have snatched wage security. And that is why informal has been become for.
That's an interesting thing. Let me go back to Mr. Jha. Mr. Jha, you heard what the 2 trade unionists and as well as the assistant professor.
Yes, I'd like to respond.
Yeah, please respond to that. They are directly challenging your notion.
No, I appreciate that. I think they've somewhat misunderstood what I said. And I like the categorization that the last gentleman just made between job security, wage security, and social security. What I was trying to say was, if you pursue job security at any cost, it becomes at the cost of wage and social security. This is what's happened in India over the last 60 years, up to the time when liberalization began.
Right.
And I'm afraid the whole neoliberal, there is a neoliberal ideology today. It's taken advantage of the ossification of the job situation, of workers' job situations caused by trade unionism in the past. I think let me be very blunt.
Right.
If you do not amend the 1977 Industrial Disputes Act, to allow hiring and firing of workers freely without having to go through state governments and all kinds of things.
Right.
You will continue to get contract and informal sector employment at miserable conditions, and the trade unions can shout and scream from here till the next century, and there'll be no change. So, please look at yourself, look at the mistakes you made in the past. Don't just lecture to others.
Look at the mistakes you have made in the past. He's saying that, you should recognize your own mistakes before you talk to others.
That is another way of looking into the thing.
Yes.
Now, all the trade unions in the country now came round to a single slogan for the contract sector workers. What is that? You pay them the same wage as regular worker if they are doing the same job.
Right.
Now, that is long back was in our law, in the rules part of it.
Right.
Now, the trade union movement could create an environment in the country which ultimately led to the fact that in the Indian Labour Conference 43rd, there was a consensus between the government and the workers, and Labour Ministry has proposed a bill amending the Contract Labour Regulation and Abolition Act to bring that provision of same wage for same work in the body of the Act. Last 2 years, that bill was loitering in PMO and other departments, and also to ASSOCHAM, FICCI and all other areas, and it is a sabotering delay is taking place. So this is how it is taking place. Out of that experience, what we had gathered, now this has become a common, is one of the important focal demand of our this strike. And in the days to come, this is going to mount.
Okay.
That the contract worker must be paid the same wage as regular worker, otherwise contract worker will not work. And do you know what is going to happen?
No,
And that is it. If the contract worker stops work, all the refineries cannot produce even a single liter of petrol. They are working in such an important position. So that is going to take place, and we will come to that same channel, that if we make the contract worker get the pay as regular worker, it itself will be a demotivating factor for those smart entrepreneurs to go for contract route.
Okay.
So we know how to tackle this.
Mr. Rai, Mr. Jha was pointing out that you people also should look at your own failures. The fact that all this has happened, that the organized sector has been able to take away workers from full-time jobs to contract jobs, do you see this also? Do you admit that there has been certain failures of the trade unions also in stopping the?
You see, when we are talking that we are in the process of continuous struggle, then question of mistake does not arise. Whether the continuous struggle is one issue and whether the continuous attack on the workers is one issue. We have to judge between them. We think that continuous attack by the government, by the employer, by the multinational company, by the other forces, this was so much high, of too much degree, that our continuous efforts could not survive. That is one thing. But it is not a mistake. Had we become a silent, then it was a mistake. We had been fighting all along.
Okay. Pais, last words to you before we wind up. You see this time, this kind of unity which has been shown by the trade unions will have some impact on the labor situation in this country.
Definitely, definitely. As it has been pointed out, this is the largest effort. It's also overwhelming because unorganized sector has come to the fore.
And the other important issue of contract labor.
And though Mr. Jha did not like it so much, the demand for 10,000 rupees minimum wage, and of course you will negotiate and so on, but it's a right demand according to me. Okay. Because wages is something, wages have been falling. In economics we call it real wage.
Yes.
Real wages have been falling for the last so many years. So bringing wages to the fore, I think it's a very important thing.
Okay, last, very quickly.
Make a quick thing.
Yeah.
This wage demand, during 80s, 90s and now 2012, the wages share in the net value added has become 1/3, from 30% to 9%.
Right.
And during the same period, the profit share in the net value added has tripled from 20% to 60%.
Okay.
And this 10,000 basis is, the basis was agreed to by the government of India. The 15 Indian Labour Conference formula plus Supreme Court judgment on Raptaco's rate. If that put on effect calculation, the actual demand becomes something around 13,000. We have understated our demand deliberately because we also want that our demand must touch the imagination of the workers.
Okay, I think we have completely run short of time. Sorry, Mr. Jha, I can't come back to you. We completely run short of time. Anyway, it's evident that the coming together of all the trade unions is certainly a show of strength, which should motivate the workers also of this country and also send a signal to the government that they need to take these issues which have been raised by the trade unions seriously. Thanks to all my guests for joining me, Mr. Prem Shankar Jha, Mr. Tapan Sen, Mr. Baij Rai and Mr. Jesim Pais. Thank you very much. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on The Big Picture.